One of my favorite video games is Shadow of the Colossus, a journey where you travel across the Forbidden Lands to defeat creatures known as Colossi, armed with a sword, a bow, your wits, and a very good horse named Aggro, taking down these usually hulking figures, one weak point at a time. And while the boss fights are these large, imposing, and grand spectacles, the moments I think about the most are the quiet ones. The ones where it's just you and your horse, en route to a destination or just going out to explore. And from a gameplay perspective, there's not much to see. No missions are waiting to be completed, no forts to be conquered, and no experience points to gain. The reason you explore is because you want to. And while you can find fruits for more health or tails from the most nefarious creatures to increase your grip gauge, the real reward of the game isn't the loot you get, but the journey the game has provided for you. Because when you hit those credits, you'll be thinking about it for quite some time. I've played a lot of video games, and chances are I'm gonna play a lot more. But I've done stuff outside of it. I've joined clubs in school, and am fortunate enough to have friendships that have carried over even as I record this. And the universal aspect of both games and these real-life experiences that I remember fondly were the journeys they took me on, not the rewards they offered. While in the moment, it was cool to get a medal in forensics club with the homies, or a shiny new gun in Borderlands 2, when I look back, the absolute joy was just the moments themselves. My team hyping each other up before we perform, or playing split screen with my brother. Those experiences are worth more to me than any of those material things. And that sounds incredibly cheesy, though I don't think it would surprise you. It's coming from a guy who would unironically say, maybe the real treasure was the friends we made along the way. But the reason that cheesy phrase has fermented for ages is that it's true. At least for myself, it's something I'm starting to use more authentically. Well, why am I talking about cheese besides being from Wisconsin? Well, it's because FromSoftware games are full of it. Nah, I'm kidding, but since we're here, let's talk about FromSoftware. Games created by this company, especially those helmed by Hidetaka Miyazaki, are magical. They should not exist, but they do. They are AAA big-budget video games that are okay with and expect you to miss most of their content on a first playthrough. They are games marketed and talked about as these brutal, masochistic experiences that are only for the hardcore, yet playing them is nowhere near as bad. And they are games that explore complex themes of the human condition subtly and tastefully, with lore from the series pieced together, revealing tragic stories. And they're also games that are hilarious. These games are complex pieces of art that can be mulled over for years, while also being enjoyable action RPGs. They're the kind of entertainment I would argue are some of the best in the medium. Of course, nothing is perfect, but these games sure come close, and they also exist, so that's pretty cool. No matter which game is your favorite, you are provided with an experience that is yours. You may have friends playing the same game or people online talking about it, but one of the great joys of these games is the journey will always be your own. You will interpret the story and approach problems in a way that's unique to you. And that sentiment is the thing I love so much about these games. Much like in Shadow of the Colossus, your journey as the player is the reward, and you can make of it what you will. Elden Ring is the most recent FromSoftware game to come out at this recording time. If you're still watching this, I'm guessing you're either a veteran of this type of game, or you've never played a FromSoftware game and want to hear someone talk about it. Regardless, I want to put another spoiler warning for Elden Ring, because I'll be talking about multiple aspects of the game, not just its story, and I would hate to ruin the many surprises it has in store for you. The first playthrough is essential for the feeling of mystery and personal discovery, and I would hate to ruin that magical first time. I don't think I'd love Bloodborne as much as I do if I didn't discover aspects of it myself. And with Elden Ring, it's FromSoftware's first take on the open world structure. A lot of the fun is discovering the setting in your personal way. You have my blessing if you want to peace out and experience it for yourself. have a blast. But if you're still here, my fellow Tarnished, grab yourself a preferred flask, internalize being maidenless, and join me in this metaphorical roundtable hold as I talk about my character arc with Elden Ring. If I were to chart my enjoyment of Elden Ring as my playtime continued, it would look something like this. The first stage was my highest level of fun, the honeymoon phase. Everything feels fresh and new, while also having enough familiar elements that I didn't feel completely lost. The description of the game being big Dark Souls made a lot of sense, using the Souls formula of how combat works while integrating it into an open world structure is a premise I never knew I wanted until it was offered. And the open world is so fun. You make your way out of the tutorial and can explore to your heart's content. You've got a general goal of becoming the Elden Lord. At this time, you have no idea how to get there, so it's the perfect motivator to explore the lands between. And much like Breath of the Wild's design, rather than placing a lot of icons on the map, the main incentive to check stuff out is because you want to. If there's an interesting building in the distance, it will be possible to get there. Most of the game's mechanics are hidden from you at first, and the way to unlock them is to explore. Such as the map. If you're in a region and can't see anything, you've got to find it. And when you unlock it, besides getting your bearings, it may also suggest some eye-catching places to check out, like a cave or some ruins that might hold something cool. While exploring, you can come across really tough enemies, and if you want to, you could brute force your way through with the weapon art of Spite. Or explore the map, upgrade your weapons, maybe get some spells, and come back and kick ass. The sense of discovery is the most substantial aspect of this game. The feeling of adventure the game creates is such a magical emotion. Even later in the game, I explored this snowy field and was invaded, and after compiling a pile of my corpses, I beat the invader, came across this cool teleporter, and was sent to a new location in my 70-hour playthrough. As I kept going, I was so invested in exploring the world and coming across cool stuff. It felt organic and really helped to immerse me in this experience. Like these nomad merchants who, when left alone, would play this beautiful music at their campfire. Or you can craft items with a kit, which lets me create raisins for my horse. And Torrent is such a good boy and deserves all the raisins in the lands between. Demigods be damned. Elden Ring was easily a 10 out of 10 video game during those first couple hours. New surprises were shown off constantly, and the sense I had this personal quest was great. The game offered many options with combat, new weapon arts, weapons, spells, talismans, etc. But as the game went along, there was a moment when the rose-tinted glasses started to loosen. With the Souls games, I give myself a rule. I don't look up a guide and play through as blind as possible. The rule being void only if I attempt something honestly, get stuck, and am not having fun anymore. The scene in the crime was the Weeping Peninsula. I was exploring and came across this servant lady named Irina, asking me to take a message to her father in Castle Moor. It had been overtaken by monsters. I'm getting excited. I've been well familiar with how questlines worked in other FromSoftware titles. There is no quest log, so my job was to keep a mental note of what was happening. A region contains storyline. I'm in, let's do this. I traveled to the castle and come across one of the memorable memorials that look like a Berserker reference. I explore the castle and fight the boss residing there. My reward is this awesome looking sword. But I didn't find Irina's father, so I began exploring the castle for a good hour, looking around for anything I missed, and then I come across a ladder and meet the man himself. I talk to him, and he agrees to leave the castle, but only after he gets a sword. The sword I just picked up. He finally agrees to travel out of the castle now that his mission is complete, and the two of us discovered that Irina was killed. He swears revenge, and I'm getting intrigued. How is this going to play out? With the weapon left behind at the murder spot, we know it's the same beast from the castle. What is this guy going to do about that? I rest at a site of grace and begin to investigate from Irina's location. There are a group of beasts just before it. The quest may continue there. So I head back. But nothing has changed. After considering the distance from Castle Moor to that area, I explore the region more, hoping I'm missing something. I did this for about 3 hours, and while I was enjoying the exploration through the zone, I had yet to make progress with the storyline. Admitting defeat, I enter my second phase and look up the quest online, and what I found was baffling. The questline is still going, but the region I was looking in, the region the quest has taken place in this whole time, was actually incorrect. It was now taking place in the lake region of the game, in a small home called the Revenger's Shack. He's now an invader, I fight him, and that's the end of the quest. And after I do this, I am frustrated and confused. The game had openly laid out a clue and then just completely ignored it, deciding the quest was now going to end in a completely different location without any context clues for the player to follow. I'm familiar with how cryptic FromSoftware games can be with quest lines and lore, but this made no sense. There was no information to suggest how this could be possible. And especially with this being open world, where the player can go anywhere, if they don't have a solid lead or hints, they're going to go insane trying to see it through, with the only clue that it's in the lands between. In the previous games, characters resided in certain zones, and depending on that character, they would move in a realistic path. Like Anri from Dark Souls 3, they're on a quest to defeat Aldrich with Horus, so of course they would progress through areas and not stay in one place. They're adventurers. And they didn't just teleport, they went through multiple areas for their goal. But in Elden Ring, I don't buy that this commander walked from the Weeping Peninsula all the way to the lake region on foot, decided to make this shack his new home, became a spirit of revenge the second I decide to rest at a site of grace. It taught me not to approach these stories realistically, but instead treat them as a very artificial progression that must be accompanied by a walkthrough. And this questline began to chip away at my glowing praise for the game. It was just one piece of side content, but the damage was done. And from then on, it completely changed my experience with the game. This was the lowest point of the enjoyment graph, and unfortunately, the most prolonged feeling I had with Elden Ring. As my playthrough with Elden Ring went along, I began to notice more and more about the game that bothered me. When clearing dungeons and finding secrets in the overworld, you would be rewarded with various new tools like spells, talismans, ashes, weapon arts, etc. But for the playstyle I was going for, most rewards would not assist me in what I wanted to do, which often led me to explore something that looked really cool, check it out, and be given a spell I couldn't use. And you could argue that the reward is not the point, the sense of discovery the game creates is the real treasure, but my problem is that most of the time, I had already seen it. You see, when you first start, everything is fresh and new, every location and every enemy is unique. But as you keep playing, you'll notice locations look eerily similar to ones you explored hours ago, or bosses are the exact same, or if the game is feeling really spicy, puts 2 repeats in the same fight. And I understand the importance of getting the most out of the enemies you make, but when they're used as the climax to dungeons constantly and not occasionally, the magic of discovery is dampened. And with that discovery dissipating, the game leans on the rewards you get to incentivize you to keep exploring. But as stated earlier, most of the time my playstyle disregarded those options. So the combination of how artificial the questlines felt, the recycling of bosses downplaying the joy of discovery, and the rewards being hit or miss depending on your build, it de-incentivized me to want to explore and just continue through the story, with the pure exception if something looked unique. And it was in the game's boss design that my enjoyment was tarnished. To explain why, I want to talk about how I approach these games. When I was a kid, I thought knights were the coolest thing in the world, armored and noble warriors fighting for their kingdoms. As I grew older, that stayed the same. The knight's, honorable or no, is my favorite fantasy archetype. So I approach these games like this. I don the coolest armor I can find, spec my points into strength, and use a greatsword-like weapon. I prefer not to touch spells because I like to play a character who, in the grand scheme of things, is just someone who uses their martial capabilities to confront foes way out of their league. I use healing flasks, but prefer not to touch other consumables unless necessary. I'm cool with summoning if I'm stuck on a boss, so I can use my sick charge attacks to deal massive damage. In most FromSoftware titles, players can customize their character and abilities. That playstyle has been doable without much difficulty every time, except for Elden Ring. While I was given ashes for summoning, allowing a guaranteed partner in most fights, that didn't change how late game bosses were designed. They were my kryptonite. Bosses have this quirk where they can dart around the room exceptionally quickly, delaying their attacks where you are punished for panic rolling. The previous tactic of hitting the enemy in their backside is no longer an option. Some bosses will pull off multiple combos that will require you to either dodge or get as far away as possible, to where after the combo ends, you can get a hit or two in before they do it again. Rather than previous games where the enemy does a smaller combo and you have more time to trade in some hits of your own, here it feels like bosses were made to counter that style of play. And for the playstyle that I enjoyed, this is a nightmare. And this came to an awful crescendo with a certain boss fight. I have completed every Souls game except Demon's Souls. I have platinumed Bloodborne and the Old Hunters. I have beaten the final boss of Sekiro in about 3 attempts and I loved that fight. So I hope you can understand where I'm coming from when I think the Godskin duo is the worst boss fight in the entire series. The two bosses are actually 2 different encounters duct taped together, and the lack of synergy or cohesion between these two shows. I think the team was trying to do a callback to Ornstein and Smough from Dark Souls 1. You have 2 enemies varying in size in a room with columns, and the fight focuses on you managing these 2 complementing attack styles, one fast and one slow, or if using a summon, each having a one-on-one for half the battle, culminating in a fight with a super powered up version of one of those enemies. The problem with this fight is how each boss isn't focused on fast or slow attacks, they are well-rounded units. If Ornstein and Smough were like fighting a sentient hammer and spear, the Godskin duo is like fighting 2 enlarged Swiss Army knives. Both enemies have fast attacks, but also have slow windups, and both have ranged black flame attacks. And I've got a bone to pick with the Godskin Noble, because when either of the bosses gets to half health and enters their powered up Ultra Instinct mode, the other will treat it like you asking your partner if you want fast food, and they respond, "I will if you will." And in this powered up mode, the Godskin Noble will do this move where he roly-polies around the area. A move that can be exploited by positioning yourself on the opposite side of a broken column. But this move only sometimes works because if he initiates the move slightly above the column, he will clip through the top and now roll towards you. Or if you move slightly, so will he and crash into you. This move can also trap you in a wall, and the camera will freak out as you witness his girth covering the entire screen. Both Godskin enemies also have this talent for attacks clipping through pillars, so sometimes you're safe and other times the game will decide you're going to take some damage. In the fight, there's a large bar indicating the duo's HP, a regular for boss fights, but each boss also has a small health bar, like regular grunt enemies. When first looking at this, you may assume the 2 regular bars combine into the big health bar. Chipping away at either will reduce the whole, and you would be right. But also wrong, because their combined total is only some of the big health bar. Because the putrid icing on top of this loathsome dung-eater cake is that if you defeat both enemies, it turns out the game was crossing its 2 fingers when the fight was called a duo, deciding to spawn another set of enemies. This can occur if you kill one of the duo, where the other will have a new move to summon another version of their partner, using an action to cast this ability. But if you kill both simultaneously, the game goes lamau and spawns another one without someone casting the summon, which may generate another as one of their action. This fight just sucks, because each boss has various fast, slow, range, area of effect attacks, and powered up forms. It doesn't feel like a well-designed encounter where each opponent offers a unique factor you can work against, but instead 2 separate boss fights in the same room and then spawns another set if you beat them. I'm incredibly biased in my disdain for this fight, as it has killed me more than the last 3 bosses of this game combined, and even a particular boss I will talk about later. If you've played the game and were able to clear it fairly quickly, that's amazing, and I'm happy for you. But my playthrough, this was my brick wall. This boss encounter made me drop the game for a while. I'm familiar with tough fights, but this battle didn't feel fair. I wasn't thinking about where I went wrong in a defeat or what would be a good counter. I was thinking about how frustrating this battle was, and recording footage for the section was terrible. I was hurling profanities at the screen as I kept dying, looking online to see if I was valid in my anger at this encounter. This wasn't the reason I played FromSoftware games. And on that note, I want to talk about the experience of FromSoftware games on the internet is a gift and a curse. On one side, a collaboration of fans coming together to express their passion for these games, sharing their experiences, tips, creations, personal challenges, and interpretations of the game's hidden secrets. This first side is terrific. It feels like you're part of a group whose members are all on their separate journeys, similar to the friendly NPCs in these games. And on the other, you have the oh man, this is gonna sound incredibly silly. The gatekeeping elitism side, the one that will openly mock players who don't engage with these games the same way they do. The ones that perpetuate an insanely masochistic reputation these games are rumored to have. Not as a friendly reminder to keep an open mind about how challenging these games can be, but as a way to make their triumphs seem more satisfying, by making the act of engaging with these games grander than they actually are. A comparison would be like playing one of these games. The latter group would be like an invader, jumping in your game hoping to defeat you, doing whatever they need to make their goal possible. It's best not to take it too personally. They could be doing this simply because they're bored or aren't having a great time right now and want to let off some steam. They don't even know you. On the other, you have summons, people who don't know you but actively choose to help you. Maybe to get some precious runes or just because they know how hard that boss was and don't want you to suffer alone. Ambiguity's kind of fun that way. Regardless, if you engage with this community on the internet, you will encounter both in some form. It's impossible not to. And a good rule of thumb is to engage with what you're looking for, then peace out when you've got what you need. But with Elden Ring, I didn't follow this rule. When I got stuck on the Castle Moor questline, I opened the floodgates. I spoiled myself with the opinions of people I never met, sharing their thoughts on this game and revealing certain moments and bosses. And while it didn't destroy my enjoyment of the game, you already know the title of this video, I formed a unique perspective that I'm sure many of others have, tempered with the wisdom of their experiences, with the opinions of other players. In fact, two critiques really assisted in my perspective on the game. Joseph Anderson's Elden Ring, A Shattered Masterpiece, and DJ Cobbler's The Last Elden Ring Review. Both will be linked in the description below. Each video offers unique views on combat and how it functions in the game. Joseph Anderson's expresses frustration with the game's boss design, encounters weaving in long combos with unclear neutral states, making the player unsure when it was safe to get a hit in, airing his frustration with bosses and how the game pushes you to a more defensive playstyle, until the boss says otherwise, compared to previous games where most attacks have windows for aggressive play. And I really resonated with this combat critique because Joeseph played quite similar to me, a melee build with no spells. But he would go the extra mile because he wouldn't regularly use summons. So when he discussed a particular boss, we will get to that one very soon, it sounded like a total nightmare to play. But even if I agree it felt way more punishing than fun, that didn't change the fact I was stuck. And I doubted FromSoftware would suddenly feel a mix of compassion and pity for my brick wall, break it, tell me how sorry they were, and send me on my merry way. I had to find a way to beat this without PlayStation Network. And that's where the second critique comes into play. While the video was more addressed to players who never touched this series, poking fun at longtime fans of these games, there was also some advice peppered in there. Experiment. DJ Cobbler highlights the variety of weapons and tools the game offers you as a way to try exciting combinations that let you approach the game how you want, agreeing that strictly melee builds will make it one of the most punishing games in the series, but using the different options that you've gathered, exploring the open world, makes the game more enjoyable. And I agree that this approach is what the game incentivizes. But if Elden Ring really wanted players to embrace this experimentation and be more open to doing so, I think respecing your character should be an unlimited resource, not how the game treats it. At a certain point, you can use a larval tier to respec your attributes. There are only 18 of these items in a single playthrough, and while redistributing your stats 18 different times sounds excessive, with the hundreds of weapons, armor, and spell combinations that are possible, that's a legitimate possibility. Because the larval tiers are a limited resource, rather than encouraging an openness for players to try wacky builds to tackle certain problems, it instead encouraged me to pick a general idea and add to that framework. If they decide to focus their future games around this experimentation, I think making unlimited respecking for characters would encourage players to be more engaged with the game's content and abilities. But that latter video was the one that got me to break my brick wall. I learned that the Godskin duo were vulnerable to bleed damage, so I equipped the Bloodblade weapon art on my greatsword, spawned in a Mimic Ash, and after a few tries, I was able to beat the pairs. While I felt accomplished in defeating these bosses, my main thought was, I'm so glad I'm done with this fight. Both critiques had me appreciate but also be aware of the game's faults. However, both videos and the internet had built up one fight that showcases Elden Ring as its own thing, for better and for worse.
I am MELANIA, Blade of Mikola. And I have never known defeat.
MELANIA is a punishing fight. She has two factors that makes this battle an immense challenge. Every time she hits, she gains health back. This can include hitting you or spirit summon. And in another way I disagree with. If you block an attack with a 100 physical guard shield, she will still gain health on it, the same amount as if you didn't block. It feels incredibly cheap. And if we're talking cheap, let's talk about that move. MELANIA's waterfowl dance is insane. It starts with her jumping in the air for a few seconds, then following 3 flurries of slashes, culminating in a finishing slash before saying "Foolishness Tarnished" and pulling a Virgil judgment cut. I've heard people say it's possible to dodge this move, even without using the Bloodhound Step weapon art. But for me, I was terrible at avoiding it. My dodges were mistimed, I tried blocking but immediately ran out of stamina, I tried staggering MELANIA mid-move, but she just kept on trucking. If I saw her helmet looking directly at me, it was time for my final words. This wrecked me pretty hard. That move and the health regen felt like overkill, and this fight was incredibly cheap. And it is by design. MELANIA is a skilled fighter, but she's also one who will use every trick in the book to guarantee victory. Her fight with General Verdun forever changed Caelid because she deployed a disease nuke to escape. This demigod has cast chivalry aside to protect the one important to her. Elden Ring functions the same way. It de-incentivizes the duels of old and instead makes the battle one of two things. Either the boss is curb stomping, or you are. The demigods of this world do not care about honor and a fair fight. What they value is strength, your will to defeat them. To get past them, you need them to understand your drive is stronger than theirs by any means necessary. And as a player, I leaned into that. Rather than being just a swordsman, I transformed my character to play like a paladin, using incarnations with a cool greatsword, allowing my character a variety of options in combat. I could go melee when I felt like it, cast lightning spears when the boss's attention was on my mimic, or buff my character with Golden Vow. It felt amazing, and rather than being miserable in my previous build, here I felt like I always had options that were unique to my character. One of my personal favorite examples was fighting a weakened ancient dragon. I finished it by casting Eldritch Lightning from my eyes. I never said I was a good paladin. I have never played a game that let me do that. It felt awesome. And with MELANIA, I had a glorious solution. People have shared how sick the Moonveil Katana is, and how devastating it can be against most enemies. While I respect that excellent choice of weapon, my character was a man of faith. And while I was scouring the internet for tips and fun ways to fight this boss, I came across this awesome video by SpookyFairy, who used a method I didn't think of but now seemed like the perfect solution. In the game, most weapons can be upgraded to plus 25 to make them stronger, but for special type weapons, they can only be upgraded to plus 10 using a rare material type called Somber Stones. One of these special weapons became my companion, my guiding light. The Blasphemous Blade. Once held by the demigod Rykard, this crimson-colored blade features the remains of countless heroes upon its surface. The tool has various properties to make it perfect for this fight. First, it's a greatsword, smaller than a colossal greatsword, and can swing faster too. I dig that. Second, when you defeat an enemy, you gain health back, which is pretty cool. But the third that makes this instrumental in my success, the Taker's Flame weapon art. This move releases blasphemous fire upon my foes in a straight line, dealing some crispy damage. But here's the kicker, it will steal health from anyone it touches. So I explored the open world and found some somber smithing stones, upgraded this bad boy to +10, then summoned my Mimic Ash with my vampire-like paladin, and we went to town. One thing about Melania that makes this fight way better is she can be staggered, and this move does a beautiful job at that. And while replaying the footage, I realized that because my Mimic used the same move, anytime he used it, he also gained health back. The battle turned into us swapping between getting aggro and spamming this weapon art. After a few tries, our victory against the Goddess of Rot was assured. Some may argue this isn't a true victory, that I exploited an enemy's weakness. They can think what they wish. I can only speak for myself, and I say this was some of the most fun I had since the first part of this game. At first, this felt like it was up to chance when I could attack and when I would die. This wasn't a cool exchange of attacks, but felt like I was playing against a stacked deck. But once I experimented, when I saw the possibility shown by another player, when I made a plan to make it happen and executed it, the process felt terrific. This was when the game became fun again. This experience made Elden Ring go back to my favorite game of the year. When I embraced the game's tools and systems, it transformed from the most brutal and frustrating FromSoftware game I've played into a unique and personally rewarding experience that I needed to see through. And once I reached this point, it was time. I headed to the Ashen Capital and met the game's final foes. I challenged Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, rocking his sweet JoJo-like stand in my favorite fight of the game. I met the final boss of the game, and then the real final boss. With this fun new playstyle, the number of times I died against these 3 bosses was 4. 4 deaths. On that 5th attempt at fighting the Elden Beast, I was able to secure a victory. And when I was given the choice of my ending, whose effects would ripple throughout the lands between, I felt at peace. My roughly 80-hour playthrough felt like a lifetime ago compared to booting it up the first time in February of 2022. I thought back to my first steps in the world and the sense of exploration that took me back to one of my favorite games. The magic being shattered when my playstyle failed, and my embracing of experimentation prepared that love again. When my character sat on the throne of the Elden Lord as he ushered in the age of the Duskborn, I felt proud to know I had seen this journey through. Despite the setbacks, it was a quest I had completed, and one I felt all the richer for taking. To those who have heard this story and want to embark on their own adventure in the lands between, I wish you good luck, brave Tarnished.